I know everybody's anxious about lunch, but we still do have 5 minutes if you've got questions and want to pin back Stevenson's ears for a minute or ask something more from Brenda that she didn't get a chance to expound on. It's something that I've been kind of talking about, Brenda, and just out of curiosity on that beef thing. Are the beef industry numbers cognizant, paying attention to adjusting with all the dairy on beef that's coming to the market? I hear from processors that the dairy farmer has become the salvation on some of that drought-related movement on livestock. Anybody acknowledging that in the economic side of things?
So, well, when we look at it, it depends on
Pull the
where.
mic closer to you, please.
So how dairy on beef affects it is very specific. So when we look at it from a national perspective on beef production, the dairy on beef really isn't changing that terribly much because those dairy cows were previously having animals before and they may have been just being fed out as Holsteins, right? So eventually that would be beef. So this is from an aggregate level, right? When we look at it from a state-specific level or from individual producers on how that works in it, then it becomes down to those processors on what is it that what types of animals do they produce, what types of animals do they slaughter, so some specific packers in that and the types of varieties that they look at. So it kind of has a bigger impact more so than regionally than it does necessarily at an aggregate national level from a beef production point of view. When we look at that, how is that going? I mean, the dairy cow herd, fluctuates a little bit there, but again, as we get into dairy beef on those, whether it's a Holstein steer that's going to be being fed out or a dairy on beef, it's still just one animal in that case. So from a national perspective, does it make a huge impact on the production? If we have changes of switching of it to dairy on beef as opposed to just Holsteins, from a production level of beef, no. From a regional perspective, yes. We'll put it that way.
Okay, so the second part of that question for Dr. Stevenson is replacements on the cow herd for dairy. Obviously, we breed more dairy on beef. We have maybe less heifers, possibly, or maybe we'll stay the same. But where are the replacement levels tending at this point?
Well, that's been part of the reason that I think we've been circumspect in not growing the herd or the capacity much in response to what's been, really pretty excellent milk prices, record level milk prices, not necessarily record level margins. But I do think that that's constraining our capacity to grow. And in the long run, we've recognized that raising heifers that aren't needed is an expensive strategy too. So, we simply don't have as many in the pipeline as we had in the years past.
Pete?
Thank you. Thank you both for your presentations. A lot of good information. Mark, your conclusion, if I heard it right, was minus $4.50 to $5 per hundredweight for milk prices. They say the all milk price this year versus last year.
Correct.
And
yeah.
You're trying to factor in many complex events, including demand, supply, recession, inflation. Can you give us a little better breakdown on what those factors or the major factors are pulling down your estimates on milk prices for 23 versus 22?
Yeah, I'll be happy to try that, Pete. And I would agree with you.
It's a dismal science.
Well, it's a dismal science, acknowledged. But we've had more moving pieces to try to think about outlook in the past few years than we've ever had before. And I don't think that that's lessened now, even though we feel as though exposure to COVID may be a little less. Our supply chains are still greatly disrupted and interrupted, and our potential economy is got a lot of question marks. I didn't mention anything like war. I didn't mention anything like an almost assured fight in the House, for raising debt ceilings and all the rest of it. I think it's almost a trivial thing that would push us into pretty serious recession. And so that's played into a lot of my thought process here, as well as the current markets for products. That includes those global dairy trade products that we have as a benchmark right now. That's not guessing at that. That's what those are now. I don't think there's a lot of upside potential in that, because if we tipple into recession, the rest of the world falls into recession as well. And it could and drag us into it in a slightly different, outlook. So those are the things that have really gone into my thought process this year when I'm talking about prices. I don't see any upside potential in price right now. All I'm looking at is how bad might the decline be.
So take John Heinberg's advice and use that CMA generosity and lock in something.
Yeah, well, I'm loath to stand here and give categorical suggestions for people, but it depends on how risk averse you are and how risk tolerant your business is.
Thank you. A couple years ago, my wife asked me how egg farmers are making any money. A couple weeks ago, she asked me, are the price of eggs ever going to come down? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, jeez.
Wow, yeah.
There it is.
Brenda's
I'm
the one that's
telling
going
you,
to have to talk
can't
about
get away from
eggs,
that
but
dirty bugger.
One
Yeah.
thing I will say is that we faced a lot of pressure, at retail for dairy. And dairy has had a significant amount of pushback. And so normally we think about, okay, what are the alternative proteins that consumers might run to? Currently, they've been kind of moving down in terms of store brand or name brands to store brands and, a few other things at retail. But where do you go if we have recession? Well, used to be eggs, but I'm not so sure that that's going to be the case right now. Lentils, we'll see.
Will they come down? I'll say that, barring anything with another round of avian influenza, and that we should be able to build up that laying hen capacity back to about where we're at. Is it going to go back to 21 levels very quickly? No, because we have to take some time to build that up. So are we at the peak, even though we hear a lot about the increase of them? When you look at it at a wholesale level, we're down just very slightly. But it's going to take, the first part of this year for sure to be able to be built back up. And that's barring that we have no more avian influenza depopulation incidences.
Just ask hatcheries. They are getting the craziest questions now from everybody wants to have a backyard bird. So